and my name's Harry Hahn. I'm president of the Mobile Riverine Force Association.
And how long have you been in that role?
8 years.
8 years.
Yeah. Prior to my being president, a man by the name of Albert Moore, who was a cook on one of the support ships that supported the Mobile Riverine Force, started the Mobile Riverine Force Association in 1992. So he was president up until 8 years ago when I took over.
So 1992, that's a while ago,
Yeah,
30 years ago.
yeah, 31 years.
And you're only the second president.
That's right.
Wow, you guys are loyal.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Uh, so how many reunions have there been roughly?
Well, we've had ever since 1992. We've had a reunion every other year, what we call our big reunion or our main reunion. And we have had in off years a reunion in San Diego, which we call a gathering of the troops rather than a reunion. And we try to hold it there because Coronado is the Special Warfare Command, and that's where many of us trained in California prior to going to Vietnam.
No, no kidding. Now you have both Navy and Army guys, right?
Yes.
Because the Mobile Riverine Force was a joint
Yeah,
effort.
and what occurred was this. It wasn't the first time in history that it occurred. Uh, Back during the Civil War, the Department of Defense back then said, "Hey, we have this area of the Mississippi which needs to be uh, navigated and traversed by uh, someone who's familiar with water, which was the Navy, and the Army guys need to fight the battles that are on the ground." So back during the Civil War, the Mobile Riverine Force was formed to have the Navy transport Army guys to fight the battles of the Civil War down the Mississippi. And what happened in Vietnam was the Mekong Delta, which is the breadbasket of Vietnam. All the rice is grown there, and it's a very important area to Vietnam. Um, at the time, there were no other roads or ways to get around the Delta except on the rivers and canals. The canals that were there were dug by the French so that they, during their uh, occupation of Vietnam, because of the rubber plantations and the vegetation there that the French wanted to exploit. Uh, they dug these canals that were very straight, very well built. And what happened during the Vietnam War was the Army, who were trying to fight the battles of the Delta, had difficulty getting around in tracked vehicles because they couldn't cross the canals. Or if they got into the rice paddy type areas, the tracked vehicles would just get bogged down. So the Department of Defense put together what they called Task Force 117, which was comprised of both Army and Navy. The Navy took World War II converted landing craft like you see landing on the beaches of Normandy, took that type of craft. They had the ramps that would drop and offload the troops, and made them into an up-armored type of boat. So they actually took World War II LCM-6s, and on the sides of them, they put 1-inch ballistic steel. And then because they were weighting them down so, they actually put styrofoam and bar armor, which was cement reinforcing rod on the sides to encage this styrofoam floats on the sides of the boats. So it made what was a narrower boat a little wider, but we kept the same ramp that would then offload the troops. So we had boats that were called tango boats, which were the troop carriers, and the multitude of the boats, the mass numbers of the boats, were tango boats. But to protect them, even though they had their own guns, they had 20 millimeter cannons and 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns to provide better armament to the armada, which would go down the rivers in a column. We had also what was called monitors, and the monitors, like the monitor in the Merrimack of the Civil War, the monitors were gunboats, and we had both 40 millimeter cannon and 105 howitzer floating tank kind of monitor to protect the tango boats, the troops. So generally, the columns were led by a monitor going into a canal or going into a particular river waterway where they would drop off the troops that would engage the enemy. So that then became what was a river division, and in the time that the Mobile Riverine Force in Vietnam existed, there was actually River Squadrons 9, 11, 13, and 15. So there's 4 different river squadrons. Each squadron had 2 divisions. For instance, I was in River Squadron 13, and we had River Division 131 and 132. So those were divisions of the actual squadron itself.
So the first 2 digits in the division number.
Yeah, the first 2
reflect
digit is a squadron,
Yeah, got
and
it.
the last digit is the division.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then each division had generally about 4 monitors, and then there was about 11 or 12 tango boats per division.
Okay.
And
So
one of the
how did the command structure work? I mean, if it's a joint, if you got Army and Navy guys, at what point does it is the decision maker?
well, good question. Yeah, especially today where you have like SOCOM, which determines operations for a joint Army, Navy, Air Force, all the divisions. Back then, because it was just Army and Navy, Army would basically determine what operation needed to take place. In other words, if there was an enemy uh, structure of some sort that was uh, spotted in a particular area, and let's say they wanted to go after that enemy in that area, they would put together the battle plan and then involve the Navy in how we're going to insert the troops. And sometimes the troops would be inserted on one side of uh, call it a peninsula or an area, and then they would be picked up on the other side as they swept through the area.
Mm-hmm.
So in the coordination, you would have a landing time, and then you would have a pickup time.
Okay.
Now this also involved later on, we would also insert SEALs
Sure.
because the SEALs associated, of course, with the Navy, the SEALs would have an operation, and basically SEALs operations were pretty much secret. They would be the only ones that would know exactly what their operation is, but they would say, well, we need a ride, so we would drop them off at a particular place, and then we'd get a time to pick them up.
Okay. So the Army would decide what the objective was, and then somebody on the Navy side would decide how we were going to get the troops from one place to another.
Yes. The early tango boats, troop carrier boats, were affectionately called rag boats, okay? And one of the uh, an acronym really for a river assault group. Okay, uh, so they would be called river assault groups, and that's where the rag came from. But the other thing was the rag top. The early tango boats had a canvas top over the well deck to protect the troops from all the terrible sun heat
Sure.
that we had in Vietnam.
How many troops would you carry on one of those tango
Oh,
boats?
they might carry maybe 20 to 30 troops per tango boat. Um, but as I said, the early boats would have canvas tops, and uh, somewhere along the line, after River Division 9 was there, they said, there's actually no place to land a helo. So, because of the jungle and the water and the mud, you know, if you have to medevac somebody, where do you land the helo? So, beginning somewhere with the River Division 11, they started to experiment with putting corrugated steel tops over the well deck to land a helo on the tango boat. And so, beginning with River Division 13, when they made those boats, they made them with a steel deck over the well deck so that you could actually land a helo on that and medevac somebody.
Wow.
So
So replacing the rag top with a helipad, essentially.
exactly. And what was pretty interesting is uh, the people who were the boat captains of those particular boats. They said that they were the boat captain of the smallest aircraft carrier in the world. Yeah, but the pilots had to be really good.
Yeah.
They would land a helo or a loach, and loach is a light observation helo, LOH, which is the little Bell two-seater. But
Yeah,
if
with
they
the
landed,
kind of bubble.
it's a bubble, yeah.
Yeah.
But the landing on one of those was an art because you just had enough room to place the skid on that deck.
Well, and that thing is, it may be rocking and pitching and,
And moving, you
it
could
may be
be,
dark out.
yeah, exactly. It
Yeah.
could be at night, and uh, but it facilitated the removal of someone who was injured. And that's mostly how it was utilized. Although, every once in a while, be out on operation for a while in a particular area, and some command, uh, Army or Navy person might want to come in and visit, and they would land on the helo deck also.
Sure, sure. Now, I want to clarify or ask you to clarify one thing, if you would, is, these boats and the men who operated them, they weren't just providing transportation, right? I mean, they were providing uh, firepower. I mean, I guess the easiest way to explain it would be, um, can you talk about the different kinds of missions that these?
Well, let me define a typical mission, okay? Where you were going to insert troops. Uh, the the column of boats, which on a typical operation, let's say you're going to insert 100 and some troops. So you might have a half a dozen tango boats, that might have 120, 150 men on them total. And you would have a monitor boat in the lead and lag of the column. So you have one at the head and one at the rear, so that they were kind of providing the firepower going in and coming out. So that was very typical. Now, uh, somewhere around 1967, 1968, they said, it would be nice to have another kind of boat that could sweep the sides of the columns for command detonated mines. And that was, once Charlie, affectionately known as Charlie, Viet Cong, uh, once they determined that, hey, these boats are going to navigate the rivers, they would place charges along the rivers and to try to mine the boats. and most of them were command detonated. In other words, they had wiring going from the mine itself over to a plunger or a detonation device. So the alpha boats had sweep gear on them. They dragged behind and to cut the wires. Um, and
How did that work? What was the mechanism?
Yeah, well, there was uh, a winch on the rear of the boat that would have uh, uh, you know a line and then drag this sweep gear, and the sweep gear had these knives that would cut they were kind of like inverted knives that
No
would
kidding.
cut the wiring.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Sorry, I thank you for clarifying that, but I interrupted you. You were talking about the
Yeah, so now we got this column, that would be led by alpha boats sweeping, and then you got the monitor and the tango boats. And the typical operation is you would then turn into, off of the bigger river, you would turn into a canal or into a waterway, which now when you go down that waterway, you're going down to the insertion point. Once we hit the insertion point, if you weren't ambushed already, because that happened a lot, here you are going down a waterway that might be 100 feet wide, and you're in a 50-foot long boat, and you're being shot at from the shore, uh, very close by, behind some nipa palm, is a enemy force that's going to ambush you and fire RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, into your boat. And those were the most damaging weapon that they used was the RPGs, uh, similar to and still used today by the enemy against armored vehicles. In Iraq and Afghanistan, RPGs were used a lot, against those types of vehicles. So, if we weren't ambushed going in, once you got to the point of insertion, you would then have turn the boats into the shore, and they would go in and they would drop the ramps and would offload the troops. Uh, Once they offloaded, you would pull the Navy boats would pull out and would go back and pick up the Army troops at some predetermined point in time, or were they called to be picked up, or in a different location.
So you said that was a typical kind of mission. Were there other kinds of missions that were common?
Well, that was the most typical mission early on in the development of the Mobile Riverine Force. Um, the along the way, with the involvement of the escalation of the war around Tet, in '68, the Mobile Riverine Force saved the Mekong Delta from the enemy in '68 because of its ability to get around and fight the battles of Tet. It was proclaimed at that time that the Navy, with the Mobile Riverine Force utilizing it with the Army, saved the Mekong Delta because they were very instrumental in the battles that occurred during Tet. And of course, Tet, anyone that's followed the history of Vietnam knows that Tet was a turning point in the war, both politically and in the battles themselves. Um, but as time went on, as you know, President Nixon was elected and became president in 1969. And Nixon's um, ran on a platform of ending the war. He wanted to get us out of Vietnam.
Hmm.
Uh, so his tool in doing that, if you want to call it that, was what he called a Vietnamization. And Vietnamization was supposed to turn over the equipment, the training, and develop the South Vietnamese army to the point that in Navy to where they could take over the war, and we wouldn't have to fight the war. The U.S. involvement would end.
Hmm.
Uh, So, starting in 1969 with Vietnamization, we started to turn over the boats to the South Vietnamese.
Okay.
So we started first in 69 with River Division 9, 1, 9, 2, and then turned over 11, 1 and 11, 2. And then in 1970, turned over River Squadrons 13 and then 15. So at the end of 1970, going towards 71, is when the Mobile Riverine Force, as it was known, existed no longer. All the boats were turned over to the Vietnamese. Now, so what happened to the Army? What happened to the Navy during the period of time that the uh, Army was leaving the country? Because as they're pulling out troops in the August, September timeframe of 1969, the Ninth Division, who were assigned to the Mobile Riverine Force, with the Ninth Division pulling their troops out of the Mobile Riverine Force, you had the Navy still working in the Delta, combating the enemy. And what happened during that period of time was that the Navy then formed what was called Task Force 194. Task Force 194 was the combining of Task Forces 115, 116, and 117. And let me just explain those. Task Force 115 was what's called the Swift Boat, the PCFs, which initially operated off the coast of Vietnam and then came into the inland waterways during 1969, late 68, 69. They started to come into the waterways of the Delta. And then Task Force 116, what were called the Patrol Boat Rivers, or PBRs. They were the little glass boats like you see in the movie Apocalypse Now. And those PBRs, who interdicted river traffic and operated ambushes during their time in the Delta, had their own task force, 116. 117, as I said earlier, was the Mobile Riverine Force task force. And then the Navy said, okay, with the Army being gone, with us having Vietnamization, with our efforts to turn over all the boats, swift boats, PBRs, and the ironclad Mobile Riverine Force boats, we're going to form a new task force which combines them all. And the new task force was Task Force 194. Task Force 194 combined all of those boats together, and we did something which was pretty interesting, which was called a waterborne guard post, which we created a blocking force which would block the enemy's ability to resupply the South Vietnamese from Cambodia. We had a boat every 500 meters along the rivers and canals on the border of Cambodia, so that when the enemy tried to resupply South Vietnam by crossing the border from Cambodia, they would have to run into us. So we were a blocking force. And we had hundreds and hundreds of boats from these three different task forces along those key border areas to block the enemy from coming in. And we got into some very hellacious battles because they'd have to go through us in order to get into the country. Mm-hmm. So Task Force 194 continued until all the boats were turned over to the South Vietnamese Navy, and the Mobile Riverine Force at that point in time, and the Navy's involvement in South Vietnam ended. And of course, and that was prior to the takeover of South Vietnam by the North Vietnamese. when we exited the country totally. It's interesting during that time where the South Vietnamese Navy had our boats, that some of those boats were utilized to take the families of mostly South Vietnamese Army and Navy people out to sea to get out to the U.S. ships to make their exodus from South Vietnam. So, that's kind of the history of the Mobile Riverine Force involvement in South Vietnam. Now, current day, 1992 is when Albert Moore, who was a cook on the USS Benoit, which was one of the support ships, and some other people met and in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they got together. There was some alcohol involved, I believe, and they said, "Well, let's form an organization." And the organization that they formed was the Mobile Riverine Force Association, and we were chartered and bylaws drawn up in North Carolina, and this association existed to bring together both the Navy and Army troops that participated in the Mobile Riverine Force over the course of the years that it existed. So I found out about the organization. It was pretty interesting because being an old sailor, I found out about the organization just ironically because I was looking for a boat to buy, and a fella had the boat for sale, and I wasn't interested in his boat. I tried to blow it off. His name was Rick Chapman, and I just tried to just get out of there quickly before I got Rick's sales job on his boat, and he goes, "What do you know about boats?" And I said, "Well, I was in the Navy on small boats." And he says, "Well, so was I." I said, "Yeah, but I was on a monitor, and you would not know what a monitor is." He goes, "Well, I was on a monitor too." Well, Rick told me that this organization existed, and I joined 25 years ago, the Mobile Riverine Force Association. And for me at that time, because the Vietnam War was such a unpopular war, there's people that worked for me in the company that I worked for that didn't even know that I had been a Vietnam vet because, at the time, being a Vietnam vet was not the most popular thing to let people know because of the way that people thought about the Vietnam War. It was unpopular after so many young men were killed there, and being a Vietnam vet was something that people might look down upon. So I mean, I didn't tell most people that I knew that I was a Vietnam vet, and with PTSD being as prevalent amongst Vietnam vets, probably because they didn't have the same release that World War II vets and Korean vets had when they came back from what might have been a popular war that they fought. The Vietnam vets, were definitely had this pent up frustration inside of them, and I personally feel that that's the cause of so much of the PTSD that occurred with Vietnam vets. I mean, we had things happening, and I can relate to you this, that even the VFW and the American Legion did not want Vietnam vets to join because it wasn't really a war, you were told, you didn't fight really in a war. And actually it was called a conflict, the Vietnam conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But so involvement, yeah,
Right.
and I had this penned up frustration in me, after having fought in 100 and some firefights is what the Navy thinks I was in, you've got this uh, stress, this PTS, as we like to call it today, rather than PTSD, you know, because it's something that you acquire as a warrior. So I had this penned up in me, and I was apprehensive at attending my first reunion because I did not know what I was going to find.
Yeah.
Was I going to be talking to fellow shipmates about the blood and guts of the war? And what were we going to discuss? And then you find out once you attend that you're discussing more about the fun things and the times you went through and the World War II sea rations that we were eating, because that's what we ate during that time was World War II sea rats, um, and used World War II ammunition, because it was all left over. You talk about things like that, and then you might relate to certain things that happened at certain times, and the guys that you lost and the memories, but mostly good memories. But it was a way for me to get that PTS release, you know, that you really needed. So, I really found that my time with the association was um, were great times, and I became more and more involved. Little did I know that some years later I would end up as president of the organization. I never thought that I would be in that role, but I accepted the role because I wanted to make certain that the organization continued as it was founded. And today, as I've told my board of directors, uh, I want to ensure that we perpetuate this organization as long as we can, as most of us are in our mid 70s and late 70s. Uh, we we want to make certain that we have that opportunity to get together as brothers, and we want to maintain this organization and memories as long as we can.
You were talking about 150 firefights. One of the things that I think is really important to clarify is when you described a typical mission, it sounded like the Navy was just giving the Army guys a ride, which is not the case. I mean, you had to fight your way in and out.
And yeah, you would be ambushed because you can't run a boat on ground. You got to go on one of these waterways. So the enemy would know you're going to be coming down this canal at some point in time, or you'd be going down this waterway, and they'd set up ambush points, and they got good at it. They would do things like try to catch you in a bend of the river, so that you could, if you shot at the last boats in the column that were already around the bend, they'd be shooting across into the boats at the beginning, and things like that. Um, we lost a lot of boats to mines, uh, mostly to RPGs. Most of the injured in these firefights that we were injured by the rocket propelled grenades. Even though we had this 1-inch ballistic steel that would be on the sides of the boats, uh, the RPG would penetrate up to 12 inches of conventional steel. And the RPG had something that was called a shape charge. So it would actually turn the ballistic steel into shrapnel. So it would, this shape charge would spin through the steel, and when it got on the other side, it would take the molten steel and fling it all over the place. So you would get pieces of the shrapnel that would be, any size, that would, of course, do everything from producing death to maiming and or producing enough shrapnel that it would create a lot of injury. I mean, there's tales of boats being hit by 3, 4, 5 RPGs at one time. And Fortunately, uh, the first boat I was on, which was a monitor, we were fortunate that the RPGs that hit us didn't kill anyone on my boat while I was there, but they certainly uh, uh, injured some of the people on my boat.
Yeah.
Now, when you follow my whole history and my whole involvement, uh, I was this kid that was frustrated with college.
Where were you in college?
I was in college in Erie, Pennsylvania, at Gannon College at the time. It's now Gannon University.
What were you studying?
And I was, my dad always wanted me to be an engineer. Okay. And I was at that point, um, I'd already had a lot of engineering, and I didn't know whether I wanted to be an engineer. But because I was a ham radio operator and involved in electronics, my dad thought, well, this would be a good career path to become an engineer. And I was kind of frustrated with college. I was in my second year, uh, and this was at the height of the draft.
So what year are we talking about?
We're talking about 1967. So as the height of the draft, this is when drafting as many people as they could for the war. And I knew that because I wasn't currently in school and I was working at a place called Hammermill Paper Company in the office, that the my number would be up soon. That I would be drafted, and rather than just being drafted into the Army, there was a fellow that worked there who was a chief in the Navy Reserve. And they said, well, I can get you into the Navy Reserve. And uh, at the time, they had an advanced enlistment program. And because I was a ham radio operator and had a ham radio license, the Navy had a program of ensuring that you would advance in your enlistment quickly with that license. So, I became a radioman, and I was E4 within a short period of time when I went on active duty. Um, One of the things, and I was discussing this today with some folks, is that there was many Navy Reserve that were uh, incorporated into the Mobile Riverine Force. Uh, the older people that had some senior rank that were boat captains, uh, the first class and chiefs that were boat captains for the most part were older Navy fellows that came in off of ships and uh, in the fleet. But the a lot of the younger guys were either new enlistments into the Navy or Navy Reserve, and uh, I felt that the Navy Reserve was chosen mostly because with a 2-year active duty commitment, by the time you got trained up and on active duty, I'm sorry, trained up and then sent to Vietnam for a year. Once you came back, you didn't have a lot of time left before your 2-year active duty commitment was up.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, from being reserve for about 18 months and then going on active duty, one of the interesting things was the first assignment I had is I went to Philadelphia to wait for my orders, and I actually got orders 3 times to go to the Riverine, the Mobile Riverine, and they were rescinded because it just didn't line up with class dates, because we would have classes for training that would start on particular dates. So I'm sitting in Philadelphia, listening to the Beatles on the radio, and I remember "Hey Jude" playing over and over and over at the enlisted men's club in Philadelphia. As we would eat hamburgers and drink cheap beer. Uh, the When I would pull duty during the daytime, because I was E4 already, I would hand out brooms and mops to people that were sweeping the floors of the barracks, the Navy barracks there. Uh, and At nighttime, when I pulled duty, and this was really hilarious, I was the chief master at arms, because I was a big guy, and the master at arms rate didn't exist at that time. It does today. If you're in the Navy and you can become part of the police force, so to speak, by becoming a master at arms. You can, it's actually a rate today in the Navy. It wasn't back then. You'd pull shore patrol, you'd pull master at arms duties just because it was your turn to do that. Of
And
course,
Master of Arms basically breaks up fights.
yeah, breaks up fights, and manages the troops and the police force, so to speak. And
Okay.
so where there was like 3,000 people in the Navy uh, reception area, transient barracks there, uh, the I would be in charge at night, uh, probably because I was E4, and it was a nighttime, where anyone else that had any other rank didn't want to be up all night long,
Sure,
So I'd
sure.
pull duty doing that until I got my orders. I got my orders in December of 1968 to go to Vietnam, and you go to training first. It was real interesting, as I had an airplane ticket to go home and visit family, and
Where was home?
home was Erie, Pennsylvania, and
Okay.
and I was in Philadelphia, which I'm 300 miles away, and there was a direct flight with one stop in a place called Bradford, Pennsylvania, and Allegheny Airlines at the time was the airlines that flew DC-3s and would fly that route. I had an airplane ticket to go home and see family over a weekend, but then I got orders. And so rather than taking the Friday flight to Erie with that stopover through Bradford, Pennsylvania, um, I took an earlier flight and went home and told my family about the fact that now I'm going to Vietnam. But what was really interesting was the flight I would have been on that Friday.
Sorry, before we get onto that,
Yeah.
what was your family's reaction to that?
Well,
Did you have military in your family?
no, my dad did not serve in World War II because of the number of kids that he had. Instead, he did
Which is how many?
well, 4 kids.
4 kids.
But he had uh, he worked an extra job or shift or whatever, uh, for the war effort.
Gotcha.
But yeah,
So
let
their
me let
reaction
me
to
let
the
me tell
news?
you. Yeah, let me tell you. Their reaction, of course, was, they were shocked. I came home early being a Wednesday before that Friday flight I would have been on, and I took a cab home, walked in, told my mother, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon that, I'm going to Vietnam. And of course she was in shock, or, she didn't have a lot of reaction at that time. And my dad's coming home from work at 5 o'clock, so I could tell him. And of course, uh, you know, they had the typical reaction of, wow, because there's so much being said on the news about, people being killed just after, 68 was Tet, which I mentioned before. And, there were so many It was every night in the news. It was how many were killed, the day previous in Vietnam. So, what was really interesting about that is, this was mid-December of '68. What was really interesting was I came home on that Wednesday, but the flight I would have been on that Friday, which would stop over in Bradford, Pennsylvania on the way to Erie in that DC-3, crashed. So I was lucky enough to not be on the plane that crashed that Friday. And as I think I've said before, maybe it was an omen that I was going to survive my year in Vietnam. I was home that Christmas time. I got to visit with family, and my orders were to report early January. I think it was like January 3rd, to Naval Inshore Operation Training Center, Vallejo, California. And you go to buy an airline ticket, and they say, I want to go to Vallejo. I didn't know where the heck it was, you know. And the first airline ticket that they issued me, paper ticket, was to San Diego. And of course, San Diego is a long ways from Vallejo, that's located in the North San Francisco Bay Area. So I reported into NIOTS and was in class 169, which stood for the first class of 1969. And there, was about, I guess, 80, 90 people in the class that were going to be the relief crews that were coming in to relieve River Division, River Squadron, I should say, 13, that was already in Vietnam, of course. The first squadron was already over there, and we were going to be the relief squadron. So it was a 3-month training, which involved learning about the boats, handling the boats, learning about the weapons, and exercises that would train you in how to function and operate in the Delta. What was unique about that area of Vallejo, California, which was Vallejo was most known for its submarine base in the northern San Francisco Bay Area. World War II era, they bring the submarines in there for repair. And there was a nuclear power school there too, where they would train nuclear power students. But in Mare Island, we'd get up every morning and have our PT, jumping jacks, push-ups, and all those sort of things. It was kind of fun to watch the older Navy guys that came off of ships that weren't as physically fit as the younger guys that were going through it, struggle through the PT. But then we would run every morning. We'd run it several miles every morning, and then on Friday we would run probably the equivalent to somewhere between 5 to 7 miles, depending on what the instructor wanted us to run. Because of course you get Saturday and Sunday off, so you had that time off to recoup from the long run on that Friday. The nice thing about the base there, which I liked, in Mare Island, was the fact that we got to eat at the submarine chow hall. And if anyone knows anything about the Navy, the submarine guys get the best food, because if you're going to be encapsulated in a steel hull underwater for months at a time, the least thing you can have is good food, you know. So it's very well known in the Navy that the best cooks of the Navy are submarine cooks. So having the advantage of the sub school there and the sub sailors who were having uh, their crafts overhauled, uh, we got to use the sub chow hall. And so you'd go in there on a Sunday morning. It was like going to a Marriott buffet. It was wonderful food.
Mhm.
But anywho, one of the toughest weeks that we had was SEER training. And I don't know if you know what SEER training is, but I will tell everyone that it stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape. And back then, we had Korean War POW instructors that would take us through the mill. Uh, we had 5 days of training, which started out with seashore training to try to survive on a seashore. And then we went up to either Warner Springs in California, was half of our group, and the other half went up to Whidbey Island, which is up north of Seattle. And you would survive in the wilderness for a period of time, living off the land, and then you would evade the enemy, which in this case were instructors, but they're going to catch you. You may resist, you may try to get away, but they're going to get you because the final phase of that training is to be in a mock POW camp so that you can experience what it is like to uh, be in a POW camp so that you can, they would train us to uh, be good prisoners, but look at the opportunity to escape. So we would be trained in that. Now, one of the bad things that happened to me during SEER was I had my jaw dislocated because they would physically mistreat you. I was waterboarded, and they were supposed to slap you with an open hand, but in my case, because they wanted me to sign a piece of paper stating that I was a war criminal, I broke the pencil that they gave me, and he didn't like that, so he gave me a second one, and I broke the pencil again, and he the uh, bad guy sitting at the desk, me uh, leaning over the desk where I was supposed to sign this, rather than using his open hand, he used his fist and dislocated my jaw. So, I had the opportunity to go through the balance of the training with a dislocated jaw, which I did because uh, uh, the alternative was that I could stop the training and go to the hospital at that point in time, and then go through the training all over again, which with 2 hours to go, they told me, they would say, out of the situation, what's wrong? Here's the deal. You only have 2 hours to go. And I said, I'm going to tough it out 2 more hours, which I did. Um, but anyways, we went through SEER training, and then we operated. When we went back and we got on the boats, we started out by just using the old landing craft, like the LCM-6s that you talked about earlier, that you would use in World War II, landing craft. They gave us those to begin with to get familiar with operating boats, but then in the final weeks, we would train on actual craft that were the exact same craft that we were using in Vietnam, including with me. I was on a 105 howitzer monitor. We had a Marine tank turret 105 howitzer on the bow, and then two 20-millimeter cannons amidship and aft. The training took place up in an area called the Suzanne Sluice. There's an area in the North Bay area, north of Vallejo, north of Richmond, California, which is very marshy, has these little waterways that uh, very much simulate the area of the Delta and tidal. So you have to be cautious of the tides coming and going. And so we'd operate up there, and we would have mock firefights and mock uh, uh, insertions and so forth. So you got a chance to handle the boats in as close to real conditions as possible. It was kind of funny because the last week that we went up there, this really isn't funny, but we're sitting out on the bow of the boat at nighttime watching this train going across the flatlands that were in that area. And all of a sudden, the train exploded. We watched this train go up in the air, and it was full of munitions that were earmarked for Vietnam, and it was sabotaged. So one of the interesting uh, uh, incidents that I had was when we came back from the training mission is to be interrogated by the FBI because they knew we were up there. Now, we didn't have any live ammo. We just had blanks that we'd fire out of our guns, But, they were like, hey, do you guys have anything to do with this train exploding? And of course we didn't. But I watched it blow up, and it was kind of it was a surreal kind of a thing. It was like something out of a movie. My tour began on the Monitor with that 105 howitzer boat, and I would, as the radioman on the boat, I'd be communicating and running operations. And then after going on R&R in the fall of '69, what we would consider fall here, I think it was probably like the 1st of October of 1969 as I was transiting back through Dong Tam from my R&R in Hawaii. I was asked if I wanted to join a River Squadron 13 staff. So thinking that this may be, good duty, I said, of course, yes. However, Dong Tam as a base would get rocketed almost every night, So the good news is I wasn't in firefights all day long on the boat. Bad news was I was getting rocketed every night. And as a staff radioman on River Squadron 13 staff, many nights I'd be in that bunker that we had, or the hooch that we had, really, and we would be the center of the bullseye for the 122 rockets that were being sent in there. You join the service, you go to war, and you don't necessarily fight the battles to fight the enemies. You're engaged in these battles, and what you're thinking about is not only protecting yourself, but protecting your buddies. And, I've heard that many times from many service people that have served in many wars, that it's that band of brothers, it's that camaraderie with your family, your service family, that you feel so close to, that you want to protect them and make certain that they come back from that war.